So, Masa, like I was saying, this is our last hard conversations via Zoom, right? We're going to go Facebook Live from next week onward. Um, so people can join us, ask questions. Like I really like the interaction that happens on Instagram during creating space, right? I like that interaction that happens. I think it's valuable interaction. And so I think moving us to Facebook, because we're already doing something on the Instagram platform, will also create that kind of community in that space. Okay, so this is our last Zoom conversation. Totally boss. We're gonna have a fun time with it as per usual. It is currently 5:20, so we will try to keep it to 45 minutes. So we should be done, I want to say 6:05, right? If we're looking at about 45 minutes. And today I want us to, we've focused on so many different aspects of identity. And I think when we go live, we're going to need to come back to certain aspects of identity to have further conversation on it. But one thing that we haven't talked about, interestingly yet, well, we've only been doing this for a little bit, but still, is age, because we work with young humans, who typically youth are not considered a minority. Right? When we think about social systems and we think about institutionalized systems, so on and so forth, we consider various aspects of social identity and we look at minority groups within those aspects of social identity, but youth for some reason aren't always considered as a minority community, even though they 100% are. Right? I know there's so many conversations where we have to point out, yes, but why didn't we not have young humans in the room? We are talking about them, even with progressive humans, we are talking about them. You would not do this with any other minority group. So why do you think it is okay to practice said behaviors with young humans? And so I want for us to talk about age. You and I are both significantly older than the population that we serve. We have also been the age of the population that we serve. That age has also looked different for us, generationally, and I want to say culturally too, possibly.
Yeah, because high school, you were
not here. Yeah, high school I was in India. Yeah, but even across that too, right? Just the intersectionality with age and other identities, as well as like even now, like what are our do we have privilege now in this age bracket? What does that look like? How does it present itself? So on and so forth. So I'd like to explore that relationship that we have with age. Yeah. So maybe we could start by, let's start from the beginning, right? So at what point did age really start playing a factor in your life?
What point did age start becoming a factor in my life? Like, did I start like being consciously like thinking about it?
Yeah, like a recognizable fact. I just got that question off the top of my head. Okay, just so you know.
Yeah, I'm thinking like, I think in a lot of ways I took for granted that I was like, so it's kind of like as a kid, it's like, because I'm this old, because I'm a kid, like there's a certain amount of like taking for granted that this is just the way things are, right? So I'm interpreting the question in that way, right? I'm like sort of like taking for granted, like I didn't question how people saw me, I guess, in a sense. Is maybe that. And then so I think I want to say it was around like the time I was in Anytown, like beginning high school, that for me that definitely became more of a thing that I was extra conscious of and started to kind of maybe identify more with other folks as well. So I think prior to, it was like you're so mature for your age, and kind of like taking pride in that and just being like, haha, like I'm, like very, in a sense, very model minority, kind of a thing. It's like model minority young person, like woo, like I'm not like other kids, you know, that kind of a thing. And then realizing like, no, I am like other kids. And I think that realization and realizing that because I'm like other kids, that people will see me a certain way, and discount me. That was something that definitely was like right around my freshman year in high school. I think I've told you the story before, but so stop me if you remember it. But I think a pivotal point for me was right after Anytown, I had joined GSA, joined PMAC, Principals Multicultural Advisory Committee, and was like getting like super involved at school, right? And then I remember going to like a family get together with extended family, so people that I don't regularly see on my mom's side of the family. And there was this this cousin, like second, third cousin, I don't know. And he was asking like, oh, so like, you know, what are you involved with at school and everything? And I told him, I'm like, oh, I'm involved with GSA, Principal Multicultural Advisory Committee. Like, I'm like saying all this stuff. And he's like, his response was, oh, so you're one of those everyone should get along type people. And I was like, yes. And like, so that precipitated a whole conversation where like he was very much like using that same kind of that standard terminology of like, you don't understand because you're young. Once you're older, you'll understand this isn't how the world works, right? So like you're just being, you know, naive. Stupid right now, right? Naive, blah 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 blah.
One of my favorite.
Once you're older, what was it?
That's one of my favorite words, naive. Yeah, I'm being super sarcastic. I hate that word. It's such a condescending, offensive, useless word in the English dictionary. I think it was created purely for the purpose of insulting. Sorry, what you were saying. Please carry on.
No, for real. Yeah. So that was kind of, I think that was a fairly pivotal moment. Like that definitely had a lasting impression on me. And I think like literally is like my guidepost of like, I do not want to be like him. Literally like as an adult now, I'm like, how do I make sure that I'm far away from that? Like, how do I check myself? And like, I definitely like I lapse, right? Like I definitely, you know, there's so much internalization of all these concepts. And at the same time, like, I think that was such a pivotal thing where like that ageism directed, you know, adultism is something that really, really hits hard for me. And like, is something that when I notice myself doing it, I'm like, ooh, it is like, it feels some type of way, you know, like
certainly.
So yeah, I think that was probably a pretty pivotal moment for me.
Right. This human was older than you, yeah.
Yeah, he was probably like in his early 30s, so my age now.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
That's actually a good. What was the way you used? Standard yardstick?
Yeah, the guide. I don't know. I said guidepost maybe. Yeah,
that's a good guidepost to have. I think especially now that you are the same age that he was, right? At that point. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Anything else?
I mean, I'm sure there's other things, but that's kind of like a big key one.
Question.
Yeah.
Is that adultism piece also prevalent? Was that also prevalent when you were growing up in Japan? Or is it a more westernized concept? Is it a more Americanized concept?
So it's hard for me to say, mainly because I was so young when I was in Japan, right? And so I think my perspective was going to be totally different. Like I was coming from a very different place in terms of like feeling like very much being and feeling like a child, right? And so like there's a certain like starkness of contrast of like where like but I don't remember, and again, like I also grew up in like a mixed, you know, my mom was, you know, from the States and everything, and my dad's also kind of, I mean, I think that's why he came to the States. He's kind of weird, right? Like he's like didn't quite fit the mold, and you know.
Oh, like that, like us.
Yeah. So So I think like I don't think I really experienced that as a kid, just because of my environment. So I can't answer to that like broadly more culturally, you know.
Heard.
Um, I definitely think I definitely remember when I learned about how my mom was raised, or like certain things, like certain stories from her about like her growing up, and like the amount of fear that she had of her father and like things like that, like those kinds of relationships, very there, those were things that like surprised me, just because he clearly had chilled out by the time that he was my grandfather. But at the same time, like it was like definitely like that wasn't something that was um normalized for me, of like the whole concept of like children should be seen and not heard, and like think like those kinds of sayings. Like I heard about that and I'm like, that's so weird. Like who would think that? But those were things that I did hear about, that my mother and like other folks who were older than me had experienced. And then also as I got older and like started talking with my peers and my friends, like that they had experienced as well. So
From their parents.
from their parents, yeah.
Okay. Heard.
To varying degrees, yeah. What about for you?
I think age is. I think the reason why I asked you that question is because
Yeah.
age has always played like a big factor in my life. It's never been. It's never been. It's just always played a big factor in my life, right? Like I don't. It's never been out of my life. So, for example, um, youngest youngest grandchild, youngest cousin. You know, so I was always well aware that I was the youngest. And on both sides of my family. Not anymore, of course, you know, not as I grew older, but there was like a good amount of time where I was the youngest, right? And all of my cousins, I don't have any siblings, and all of my cousins are much older than me. Like about, I want to say, on my mom's side of the family, my cousin closest to my age is 11 years older than me. On my dad's side of the family, I have cousins who are closer to my age, 6 months older, 2 years older, 4 years older, like that. Right? But like that, being the baby of the family was always very much there. It was a thing. It was just always a thing. You know, like I'm sure they said it to me the moment I was born. It feels like that much of a thing. You know, oh my God, you're the youngest in the family. Even before I knew what language was, I'm confident that happened. I was also youngest in my class because I was a year young for school when I joined. Right? So I was always the youngest on average among everyone else. Then went to college because school, I was the youngest. College also, I was the youngest among everyone. So everybody started college at 18. I started at 17, you know, so things like that. So it's been like an interesting transition from different ages to different ages, right? So after I finished my undergrad and my master's, when I came to the US to do my second master's, there were people who were doing their first master's. So I suddenly became the oldest in the class. You know what I mean? There were definitely one of the older ones in the class. There were definitely people who were older than me doing their master's degrees, right? But I definitely became the older one in the class. And then like when I was at USF and teaching at the Writing Center, I was definitely one of the elders, right? In that space. And then even in the poetry community, a lot of poets are much younger than I am. Not youth poets, but I mean even like adult poets, right? Can be much younger than I am because they've been introduced much earlier to the art form and so on and so forth. I started very late in poetry. And there are, of course, my peers in poetry too, you know, and like who are closer to my age, for certain, Liz, Dennis, Wally, all of them, right? No, Dennis is not close in age to me. I'm sorry, I think I'm at least 8 years older than he is. So that's not close in age. But definitely there are peers. And then there's also a significant age difference. And then like working with Anytowners and then all of our volunteers as well, I definitely fall in the higher age bracket. right? Fell in the high age bracket when I joined, and then now for certain, I am definitely in the much older age bracket. You know, so it's been like a really solid, like a solid transition. Like I feel, I don't feel some type of way about it. I feel good about it. You know, it's been like a nice transition. Where you're like the youngest for so long, and then now you're like the oldest. You know, so it doesn't particularly feel some type of way. And at the same time, I think there are so many other things that come with it or go with it, right? Like I don't look my age.
Okay, yeah.
That's a huge. So again, like when I go back to India, I'm still the kid, right? But I hold a lot more responsibility here than most of the elders in my family. You know what I mean? Like the work that I do, the people I'm responsible for, how much money I make, how I, you know, like what I do with my life, so on and so forth. All of those responsibilities are much higher than many of the adult humans in my life. So I'm 36, but the conversation always still happens like I'm a teenager. Yeah, there's a lot of adultism in my family. I'm sorry, I forgot to lead with that. There's a lot of adultism in my family, right? In my culture in general, there's a lot of adultism. We are definitely one of those cultures who you must respect your elders. Blanket. No two ways about it.
I'm curious about, sorry, this might be a little bit of a derailing, but like I'm curious about the respecting elders piece, because I feel like we've had a little bit of conversation around this, but like the difference between earned respect through experience and through like accumulated knowledge and wisdom and things like that versus that expected sense of authority just because of your age. So in your case, there was almost just because of the age, no matter what, even without that, again, like you said, the responsibility and without that knowledge or wisdom, that there's still that expectation that like, no, I'm still older, so therefore you will give me so-and-so respect. I'm just clarifying for myself.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. There's that even now. It was definitely there a lot more when I was growing up. I don't know, quantitatively, actually, I don't know. It was there a lot when I was growing up. I think it is fairly significantly existent now too, both in culture and in family. You know, like I've gotten in so much trouble with police when I was in India. Like the most amount of trouble, any sort of like, okay, we're gonna get into this, right? Any sort of like physical beating that I have received, right? Like I've definitely, you know, been in fights before and things like that in India for all the right reasons, right? And you look like this, there are certain things that happen in your life, right? But any of the times that I had like that kind of authoritative violence enacted against me, it was 4 out of 5 times that I've been in that kind of trouble, it's been by cops. You know, but it's nothing to do with my gender. It has nothing to do with my sexuality, which you would think is the prime problem, right? But it's not. It's always because I looked so young.
Wow.
Always because I looked so young. Because, you know, I used to I'd ride my mom's scooter. I'd ride my friends' motorcycles. I would do all of that, right? I had a license. I never rode without credentials at all, right? I waited till I learned from my friends. I got my learner's permit. I learned from my friends, and then I got my license. And it was only after that I started riding motorcycle. You know, like I was very proper like that. Like I did not believe in unnecessarily getting into trouble. That gave me absolutely it never has given me any sort of pleasure whatsoever, right? It's not fun. But at the same time, like when I would get pulled over by cops, right? You get pulled over and they assume your age instead of asking for your identification. And their first instinct is to hit you, you know, and then comment on your age, right? Like, you're so small, or your size, because I'm small. You're so small, who the hell gave you a license? Or you have some nerve at this age driving around, blah, blah. Don't feel bad about it. It's not that big of a deal. Most of us experience it, right? So there's just a lot of that. Because you are young, I have every right to put hands on you, first of all. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of that also comes with it. There's a lot of, age brings a lot of like lack of power. Mm-hmm. Like everybody thinks they can discipline you because of how young you are. Okay, I looked young, but assume, let's say I was that young. You know what I'm saying? Call my parents, you still don't have the right to put your hands on me. You know what I mean? There's one time I used to go pick up my mom from, after a certain age, my mom didn't like riding her scooter to work and back and stuff like that, right? So she decided she was just going to take public transportation, which means taking a bus. Buses are really crowded and very inconvenient. It's just not cool, right? So I would pick my mom up from work and I would bring her, sorry, I would finish college, I would go pick up mom from work. So I'd take the scooter, right? I'd go to college, I'd pick up mom from work, and then we would go back home, right? So there's one time my mom's sitting, Masa, my mom is with me on the bike. She's behind me, right? And this old uncle, old man, right? We're riding, I'm riding, we're in traffic in the middle of the street, pulls up over to my side, right? And he's like pointing at me. He's this close to me, right? He's pointing like that, trying to touch my shoulder, trying to poke me like that, right? And he's going, do you have license? Do you have license? My mom is not one to be okay with things like this. She's a very gentle woman, but she's not one to be okay with things like this, right? She whacks his hand off and she was like, I'm her mother. She's fine. He starts questioning her. Does he have license? Does he have license? Thinks I'm a dude, right? Does he have license? Does he have license? And he's right, like, this is my scooter. He's riding that close, right? And he hit me. You know, he hit me. We stopped. He stopped, got off his bike, came, grabbed me by the collar and says, how dare you ride without a license? Looks at my mom and says, you have no shame. You're letting him ride without a license. My mom lost her ever-loving crap. She just lost her mind, right? Sorry about the language. She just lost her mind. Only problem is when my mom is not fluent in Tamil. So when she loses her mind and she tries to speak in Tamil, it does not work out well, right? She's not making a lot of sense. You know what I mean? So she starts yelling at him in English. Like for all of us, one of our first languages is English. So she starts yelling at him in English. Oh, I thought my mom was going to hit that dude that day. I was literally standing in between both of them, not defending myself, trying to get my mom not to beat the living crap out of this dude, right? Because he was so inappropriate. And my mom does not agree with that. You know, like, you do not put hands on my daughter. If you have a problem with my kid, you come tell me. I'll figure it out. Also, I am 22 years old at this point. I've had my license for 3 years. You know what I'm saying? 18 is the age that you can get your license. I've had my license for 3 years. So anyway, so that is the level to which people think they can discipline you. So if like a random uncle on the street thinks he can pull you over and brutalize you, why wouldn't a police officer think the same way? You know what I'm saying? In my experience, a lot of that has not changed in my family. I don't really think that culturally it's necessarily changed either. Every culture has its shortcomings and its, you know, its drawbacks and its positives. But I think like that accountability piece is necessary because you shouldn't be putting your hands on someone else's child under any circumstances. And I believe that for this country too. You know, I believe no matter what happens with young humans, if there is a problem, you call their parents. You do not deal with it yourself. And by that I mean you do not discipline a child if they are not yours. You do not discipline a child, period. But if they are not yours especially, you do not put hands on them. You know, so all of these things that we hear about SROs and teachers and thinking that it's okay to violate a young human space, physical space. It's also because we don't believe that they deserve to have their own physical space. Like how many people, show of hands, how many people think young humans should not have privacy, young humans should not have agency, young humans, especially that privacy aspect?
Yeah.
You know? And we
Yeah.
call it safety, right?
I wonder how much, I don't know, there's like, in some ways, it's almost like there's some cases where like I felt like you know what? Now that I'm like, oh man, this is making me think a lot. Because that privacy piece, right? And like that sense of like
Ooh.
a certain amount of autonomy.
Right. Like you're
Right?
your own person.
Yeah. And like definitely like I got in trouble for doing my own thing without letting my mom know. Um, but I also like that was one of the things that I do remember was like um at the end of the day, like it's interesting to reflect on how much I felt a sense of freedom to still to explore and to be my own person.
Mm.
I think like on the flip side, like there wasn't as much of a fear of definitely I think what you're sharing is putting things into perspective of like I am not going to be violated or be yeah because of my age I'm not going to be preyed upon by my community.
Right.
Like that was something that I think I took for granted when I was growing up as a kid because I definitely had a lot of freedom and a lot of autonomy, but it wasn't coming from a place of neglect or anything. It was coming from a place of like no, like you get to have responsibility and like agency and freedom to do you.
Okay. Right.
You know,
like that's how you were raised.
I mean, like in Japan, so like literally I took the train by myself, you know?
How old were you?
Like 6, 7.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's only a few stops, but it was still like, you know, like that was like a thing, you know, walking home from school, you know, with friends and, you know, different things like that. And like definitely I got in trouble because like I would take that and take it to the extreme and like not communicate and like all that stuff. And like there's a certain amount that like, you know, people worry, like we need to communicate as people, right? But it wasn't like this sense of like I own you and I own all of your actions and I can't, you know, and like you will only do as I say. Like I realized like now I'm like looking back, there was a lot of freedom that I had. There was a lot of ability and opportunity for me to find and discover myself and be with other folks my age, and to do my own thing.
That's really neat. Yeah. That's really boss, man. Huh. Because I think about the perception of age too, you know, because there's been so many times where, I mean, you know this, all the stories that we've told in the office about how many times people have in schools have mistaken me for being a middle schooler, high schooler, you know, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Without necessarily taking the context clues into account, yeah? So you look at me, I look young, okay, you think I'm young. I also have a million tattoos, and I always wear an anytime shirt when I go into presentation. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I have tattoos, I have piercings, right? So context clues, okay, let's say context clues also don't come into play. Let's say I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt or anytime hoodie and you can't tell. All right. But the shift, the almost immediate shift in behavior when they find out that I am not a young human is bewildering.
Yeah.
You know, so then you do know how to treat a human with respect. Mm-hmm. You literally just chose not to. That's an active choice, Masa. That's not a mistake.
Yeah.
You know? Because I'm thinking to myself, if I was that 12-year-old kid and a teacher or an AP or whoever it is came and said, you know, if I'm on the phone and came and said, why aren't you in class? Shouldn't you be in class? Like that. Mm-hmm. Both legitimate questions. Mm-hmm. But with that sense of authority, and who knows what's happening in my house that I'm responding to in this moment. The kind of emotional turbulence that can put that child through, because it immediately implies that you are in trouble. Mm-hmm. You're not actually asking why they're not in class, are you? You're letting them know that they're in trouble for not being in class. Mm-hmm. That is as rhetorical a question as it gets. You know? So then that kid might be going through something in that moment. You don't know what's happening in their life, home life, blah, 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 all that. And here's the thing. We know all of the things that actually happen in these young humans' lives. So we can preemptively be conscious of it. You know? Mm-hmm. But then the moment you ask that question, you've already shut it down because you're not offering help. You're offering judgment and punishment. Mm-hmm. Most importantly, you're offering punishment. You know? And I think that punishment piece is a piece among all minorities. Young humans across intersections of identity are the most familiar with that concept of punishment. I know that when I was young, definitely it was such a threat always. Like there was always the threat of punishment for everything. Mm-hmm. Right? Don't eat your food.
It's literally, yeah.
Don't go to bed, punishment. Don't brush your teeth, punishment. Don't listen to what I'm saying, punishment. Don't finish your homework, punishment. Don't walk fast, punishment. Don't write fast, punishment. Don't eat fast, punishment.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. So I've never really wanted to have kids. Mm. At the same time, it's mostly because I don't want to screw up. But at the same time, like I think like one of the things that is so in exactly what you're saying of like that punishment piece is so pivotal, and like that authoritarian piece, right? Like authority, and it is literally like it's wrapped up in control and power, but at like a very, very, very like small, or not small, but like close level, right? Like family unit level, in the home, in school, or in these like individual interactions. And it's so interesting to think about. I think there was like, there was I remember hearing about some research that was showing how parenting styles can have correlations with people's affinity toward authoritarian politics. And it's like, but it makes sense, because if in a sense, it's like if the mentality is because I'm older, because I'm an adult, and because you are a young person, suddenly this negates, again, like you said, that respect, that basic dignity, respect for you as a person. And like suddenly it's like, no, you are lesser than, and I have power over you, and I can exploit that power. That makes a lot of sense that would correlate with those tendencies.
Right. Yeah, it also just shocks me. It doesn't surprise me, but it shocks me how easily we validate those behaviors to our children too. Mm-hmm. You know, like they deserved it, or mm-hmm. you know, the validation of those behaviors, which
they must have done something. Yeah,
they must have done something, or which, you know, happens with race and gender too, mm-hmm. right? But that I think more the idea of the justification of that's an okay response to have to that child's behavior. Mm-hmm. For example, I'm your boss, right? If you back answered me and I slapped you, what would the response be? Would that be an acceptable response? Also, let's back answering someone. You know what I'm saying? Let's start from there, right? The definition of back answering, what? Holding somebody accountable, questioning mm-hmm. someone's intentions, mm-hmm. right? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That would never be an acceptable response to you. Mm-hmm. But in adult, young human dynamics, still not acceptable. But that wavers a little bit. Yeah. But it's excused, yeah.
Yeah.
That wasn't the best way for you to handle it, but I understand why you did it. that wasn't the best way for you to handle it. Maybe next time you could do this instead. Like, the consequences are not that severe.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or if a young human holds you accountable, and the manner in which we speak back to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, and I mean this like generally, not just in schools, right? Just generally as people, the manner in which we talk to young humans and think that's okay. We wouldn't do the same thing with an adult. We wouldn't necessarily do the same thing with an adult. You know? Say adult real quick.
Adult?
Pronounce ADULT.
Adult?
Adult, okay. You also say it like that, right? I know people who say adult.
Adult, oh yeah.
Is that how you say it?
I've heard people say it that way, yeah.
Right, okay, so I'm just, sorry. Side note. I'm just making sure you know what I'm talking about when I'm saying that, because if I need to modify my pronunciation. You know, like things like that. Things like that. Yeah.
I remember it was interesting. So like back in I think there was so Community Tampa Bay there was like some kind of collaboration with Hillsborough County, why am I blanking out?
Children's Board.
Children's Board. Thank you so much.
Right.
The Hillsborough Youth Collaborative. And I remember sitting in on one of the conversations they had with the youth were talking to this person who was a representative of, it was some kind of like parents' rights organization. It was like a parents' rights organization and because his position was against the international why am I blanking out on all the words? But it's basically, it's like the human rights document, but it was like the international rights of the child, right? So it's like establishing that children have rights, and here are the rights that are established. And the United States is one of the countries that is not signed on.
Of course.
And of course, it's non-binding, right? It's more of a symbolic commitment, like just a lot of other things that are kind of like with the UN and other, international accords. But yeah, it was the level of vitriol with which he was talking back to them, because they were challenging him on these positions and everything, but he couldn't. In a sense, it was like, and again, it came out very, very clearly, like that attitude and that mentality where it's like, because I cannot defend my argument, the only way that I can defend it is because it is rooted in this, which is my authority as an adult takes precedent over anything that you say. And so literally he actually left the conversation. He hung up on them in the middle of the conversation. But that was something that also had a pretty big impact on me, like seeing just how like he's trying to make arguments around like, well, like trying to make logistical arguments, but it was very much like you could tell that it was rooted ultimately in his authority and his sense of entitlement as an adult.
Yeah. I mean, any sort of supremacy is problematic. Any sort of supremacy from one majority community over the other is problematic, right? I can totally imagine like humans watching this conversation between the two of us and saying, okay, then children should go out and get jobs as soon as they're born. They should do this, they should do that. Personally speaking, like I'm not interested in those conversations because they're not productive in any way, right? They don't benefit you, they don't benefit me, they certainly don't benefit our young humans, right? And that's not a conversation that I want to have without them in the picture. But as someone who constantly gets pummeled on because I look young, so it's even that perception of age. It's not even the actual age of the individual themselves. It's that perception of age. So because people perceive that I'm younger, they think it's okay to talk to me a certain way, right? And especially if you see me, if we're at a CTB event and you see me with a group of our young humans, if you don't know who I am, it's easy to think that I'm one of them, right? Because I look young, yeah, and then they're who I'm going to be hanging out with if they're there, right? If they are in that space. So it's easy to make that mistake. And at the same time, so what is the agenda? Like, what's the standard then? Right? Like, how do you expect me to look a certain age for your preference? You know, when 80% of the time I'm a solid amount older than most of the people who are being condescending toward me, right? But so I think then the implication is, again, that what it was in the beginning is that it's not on the young humans, it is on the people who are seeing them a certain way. Because if I can be an adult and still be seen as a child because of your point of view, then isn't it your point of view that needs to change? You know what I'm saying? So that piece about humans will argue, right? Let them start working at whatever age, blah, 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 all of that. It's not a productive conversation because it's so binary. Either I have all the authority until you're 18 or I have no authority until you're 18. That's not a community-centered dialogue.
Yeah.
You
and
know,
that's why,
it's not trauma-centered. It's not identity-centered. You know what I mean? That's like telling any other identity. That's like telling gay humans, oh, you want, I don't know what, well, we have no address. I'm thinking what they could or could not give us. Okay, whatever. Right? You want to not be discriminated against. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to find, I'm sorry, I can't find a comparison.
But again, it comes back to the difference between equality versus equity.
Equity, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's like,
that's where
I am different from you, right? We are different and we have different needs.
Yes.
So but the piece is to respect me well enough to know and get to know my needs and to meet me where I'm at and to have a genuine relationship and conversation, as opposed to just treating me as an object, right? Reducing me to this shallow one-dimensional aspect of who I am and saying, because of this, now you are devalued as a person.
Right.
And then reducing that relationship into just a power dynamic.
Right.
Nothing more.
Yeah. I mean, the only reason I'm trying to make a comparison is because the youth are not considered a minority community the way other minority communities are. You know, standard, on a standard plane, they're not considered minorities the way other communities are. You know what I'm saying? So, but you can't have this all or nothing idea. For anything, you can't have this all or nothing idea. It doesn't work that way. You know what I'm saying? It's like saying, I'm adamant to find this comparison. It's like saying, all right, so everybody wants non-discrimination rights, right? Like all LGBTQ plus humans want statewide law to pass so that you are not discriminated against. Fine. Every one of you has to disclose yourselves. You know, you have to disclose your identity. If you're a member of the LGBTQ plus community, it is required that you disclose your identity. Makes no sense, right? You know, so two completely different problems altogether, neither of which make any sense. You cannot have a child, you cannot have a young human working like that, right? And at the same time, you cannot require LGBTQ plus humans to disclose their identity. There has to be choice in that matter, right? And there has to be common sense in this as well. Nasa, you there?
Yeah.
Okay, you're frozen for a little bit. Do you know what I'm saying? Do you see the comparison that I'm making? It's definitely apples and oranges. You know, and at the same time, what I'm trying to show is that even when it's apples and oranges, this is how ridiculous those kinds of arguments can seem. It's an irresponsible argument to make on both ends.
Because you're not taking into consideration the community itself.
No, you're not. It's like you said, you're not asking them what they need and respecting them for what they need. You're trying to make decisions for them. And at the end of the day, it has an ultimatum to it. That in itself makes it completely unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? That's toxic behavior. To require an ultimatum is ultimately toxic behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if we said, young humans, you are young humans, you are going through things and you have a life and you have an actual existence and you live in this world and navigate this world, let's find out who you are and what it is that you need to feel like you live in this world and you navigate this world, to feel validated in that life and that navigation. I certainly wish I had that when I was growing up. You know, it would have eased up on at least one of my identities. You know, and for certain, I did not have that. I was 100% one of those young humans who felt like I had no power at all.
Mm-hmm.
Age is also relative. So when I go back to India, when I'm with certain parts of my family, I still feel that way. When I'm occupying certain spaces, I still feel that way. You know, like I have to dress a certain way for people who are not familiar with me to take me seriously.
No, that's legit. Yeah.
Problem, no?
Mm-hmm.
It's not okay. Okay, we are at 45 minutes. How do you feel about this conversation?
I feel good. I feel like going deeper, part 2. I feel like this was helpful in terms of thinking about my own memories.
Yeah.
And then kind of making comparison and because again, I think I guess kind of to close it out, it's helpful to think about what is possible, deconstructing what has been and what I have experienced, and what other people have experienced, and then seeing like what does it look like from what I have experienced that is good, but then also deconstructing the things that I've seen as well. So
yeah, I think in part 2 it might be valuable for us to talk about what are things that we had to restructure in our own minds to create best practices for how we interact with young humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I had to definitely do a lot of that, and I'm still working on it. So
definitely, same.
Yeah.
And for like, how do we create spaces in which young humans know that they can hold us accountable to our adultism? Because that has to happen. Otherwise, you know, we're talking to a brick wall, basically.
Yeah. I don't want to be Joe.
Huh? Who's Joe?
My cousin.
Don't be Joe.
Don't be Joe.
We don't need more Joes in this world. We need more Masas.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it.
Be Masa, not Joe. I was so confused for a second. I was like, what's that? Like, did this just go political? Are we talking about Well, on that shared laughter note.
Yeah.
Thank you, Masa. As always, a wonderful
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to moving this to Facebook Live. I think it's
Heck yes. So excited.
All right, fam.
All right.
Thank you.
See ya.